All right. Hello, Startup Grind community. Excited to be here with KR Sridhar. I've had the fortune of working with him for about 10 years since I joined NA in 2011. But it was actually a couple of partners of mine who had the insight to invest in Bloom Energy almost 2 decades ago in the early 2000s. It's been really amazing to work with KR. I'm excited to dive in deeper to understand more about fuel cells and how they're going to help solve our energy climate crisis. To start off, KR, why don't we just jump in, right? It should be no surprise that we're undergoing a climate crisis, an energy crisis, just given with what happened in Texas a week and a half ago when Austin and much of Texas froze over. So, I mean, what did you make of that? Why do you think that happened? And why are we finding ourselves in the situation we're in?
Aaron, first and foremost, good afternoon to you. Thank you. It's a great opportunity to be able to join you and speak and address so many entrepreneurs and aspiring entrepreneurs. So hello to everyone. Yeah, with respect to Texas, look, Texas is just the example of, unfortunately, what the entire country is going to face. Every state, every city, wherever you live, is in reality one natural disaster away from lights out for a long period of time. As scary as that may sound, that is today's reality. The question is why? And it's not just Texas, right? You saw that happen in California last year with the wildfires. You've seen that happen in the East Coast with hurricanes. You have seen that in the South with flooding. You have seen that in the Louisiana coast just recently in Lake Charles. You have seen that with Derico in Iowa. You've seen that with tornadoes. I can go on and on. So what's happening? Our grid and our power infrastructure, like most other infrastructure, is extremely old. To take the electric grid in particular, the American Society of Civil Engineers gave it a D- failing grade. Okay, it was built 50 years ago. It's well past its design life, and it's being run to fail. So take that on one side, and then say we have entered a new abnormal, not a new normal, a new abnormal that's going to get weirder and weirder as time goes by. And that is the impact of extreme natural disasters that are stronger than before, that last for longer duration, and are more frequent. So you take an aging, brittle, broken infrastructure and put that with this massive Mother Nature created event, you're going to see this happen again and again if we don't do the right things.
Yeah, I know it's definitely one of those things that each of us in our own respective regions are experiencing. Talk about things getting weirder and weirder. I just remember back September when I woke up and the sky was orange and then my power was out. And I imagine that's going to become a increasing occurrence unless we can figure out how to tackle the energy crisis. But I think what's really fascinating about you and your story is this isn't news to you. For a lot of us, this increasing amount of natural disasters and the energy crisis is something that we're experiencing firsthand more and more. But you effectively saw this coming, right? I mean, you founded Bloom, if I'm right, about 20 years ago in 2001. Tell us more about that. Why did you see this coming? Tell us about the origins of Bloom and why fuel cells? Why did you see fuel cells as a key part of solving this crisis?
Sure. So I was working, prior to 2001, I was working on Mars missions. So I had a laboratory that was trying to figure out how to create oxygen, breathing air, water, heat, electricity on Mars. So one day humans can live off the land in Mars and have human colonies. And just recently, the same week, ironically, that we had the Texas issue was when the Mars lander landed with an oxygen experiment. I had built the first oxygen experiment in the 1990s to fly. Unfortunately, the FedEx trucks were not coming often enough to take my experiments from my lab to Mars. And so I said, I'm doing this because I want to have an impact on people. And that's the entrepreneurial spirit most of us have, right? I mean, why do we start companies? There is a higher purpose. We feel compelled and pulled to go in some direction. And that's what I was working on. Earth is a cradle. We're all children still living in our cribs. One day we'll get off the crib and go. And when we go to other places, we need to learn to live off the land. And I was trying to figure out how to live off the land when land is Mars. But then it dawned on me, light bulb going off, kind of, is Earth has a sustainability problem before we fix Mars. And with the 7 billion people on the planet and how things are happening, and being at NASA, being with the scientists, the data was very clear that we are headed towards a path that I saw. And it also became clear that we are going into a digital world where everything runs off electricity. And, close to 2 billion people either have no access or limited access or cannot afford electricity at all. Forget the 2 days you and I complain about not having electricity,
right? Right. We're very fortunate in the grand scheme of things.
Right. In the scheme of things, when you look at it relatively. So you take the two things together, Aaron, and then you say 140 years, roughly, in the 1880s is when Edison put the first grid. If an industry could not figure out how to create 2 billion consumers and customers and could not even on one side and could not offer what the developed world was looking for in terms of personalized solutions, reliability, resiliency, safety, clean, then it's an industry that is ready to be disrupted for good and bring about a new paradigm. So I asked myself the question, what exactly, are there any big markets? Because you're talking about a multi-trillion-dollar market, right? And you're saying whatever we have done in the 140 years worked in the past, there should be a better way to do this going forward. And this was very early in the clean tech days where people did not understand why it was necessary,
That's
as you
right.
said.
If I recall, you were one of the first investments by Silicon Valley in clean tech. I don't even think it had the clean tech name back in the early 2000s when NEA and Kleiner and other folks started to invest in the space.
Yeah, when I walked into Kleiner and NEA, my Series A and Series B, investors, they could not tell you why energy was important or how big the market was, or even what they paid for their electricity bill, or where, and it's very interesting. During the California crisis, Pew actually, and this was in the early 2000s, late 1900s, early 2000s, when we had the crisis in California. Pew did a survey and asked people in California, where does your electricity come from? And I think an overwhelming number of the respondents said, from my socket. And so that's the time. Again, let's go back to the story then. That is, if I said, are there big markets where transformation has occurred and how is it being disrupted? And I saw that in computing and I saw that in telephony. We went from large mainframe computers to distributed computing. We went from large centralized power plants and centralized central offices and copper wires of landline telephones to distributed, wherever you go, cell phones, mobile phone. So we did that in computing, we did that in telephony. And what happened? It created access, it created affordability, it made it personalized, and it made it better. So I said, what is the cell phone equivalent for electricity? So distributed is the answer. And then it dawned on me, centralized command and control means people are going to tell you who can access and who cannot. If you're by the railroad track, you're in luck, otherwise you're left out, right? That's the old paradigm. That's the same thing here. So centralized command and control is communism, distributed is democracy. So I wanted to democratize energy. And that's why the mission statement, affordable, accessible for everybody on the planet. And so it was a big vision, said, so we need something distributed. And fuel cells happen to be one of those things where you can get distributed and you can get 24/7, you can make it reliable, and we can talk more about it. So that was basically the high level thought process. So it was a company that didn't create or know about a technology and then say, how do I create a market? It's a company that said, there is a big mission and a big need. How do we solve it exactly the right way?
And I really love the mission orientation and founding of the company, as well as thinking about it in terms of beginning with the end in mind. Where do you want to go? What's the problem you want to solve? And based off the technology you have today, how can you get there? And I do want to take some time to dive a little bit more into the technology. I think some folks in the audience may be new to fuel cells. Maybe just elaborate, what exactly is a fuel cell? How does it produce energy? Why is it valuable? And at least in terms of the time, why weren't we already all on fuel cells already? What were the challenges that needed to be solved? Why did Bloom needed to be started to scale fuel cells?
Sure. So, let's start with the basics, right? People say fuel cells, oh yeah, they're big batteries, right? No, they're not. So let's start with what is a fuel cell, right? The easiest way I explain to people, those of you technologically oriented can go, will already know or can go do your research, but a very simple way to think about batteries and fuel cells and the differentiation. Think of battery as like a bank. You cannot put your ATM and get your money out unless you already put your money in. So a battery is something where you first need to store electricity in it, and then you can take electricity out of it. So that's how a battery operates, right? You charge your battery. You need electricity for that. And then when you need that energy back, it just stores the energy like the bank stores your money. Think of fuel cell like a mint. It makes money, right? It generates power. It generates electricity. But as you all know, in basic science, right, basic laws of thermodynamics, energy is neither created nor destroyed. It's just changed in form. So it's when it's a mint, it is really taking, what is it taking and what is it converting to electricity? It's taking chemical energy and converting that to electricity energy. So that's what a power plant does. So what is the difference here, right? Here's what happens in a traditional conventional power plant. A fuel, whether it is hydrogen, whether it is biogas, whether it's natural gas, coal, you name it, oil, is burnt in air to create heat. That heat then raises air temperature or water to steam, and that hot air or steam runs a paddle wheel called a turbine. Around the turbine, you put copper coils, and using a phenomenon called Faraday's law, that mechanical energy of the running turbine becomes electrical energy. That's how you create electricity. So what have you done? You've gone from chemical energy to heat energy to mechanical energy and then to electrical energy. And that can only be done in very large scale. And it's noisy, ugly, and it puts out a lot of bad stuff. So you put that far away from where you live because you don't want to live anywhere near it.
Yep.
And then you got to bring that electricity to where you need, which is the fifth element, which is transmission distribution, the wires, the grid. So you got 5 elements here. And this is like, if you had money and you had 5 money managers managing your money, you better believe that at the end of the day, each one is going to take something out and you're going to get very little. Science works the same way. When you convert energy from one form to another, it takes a little bit away. What happens in a fuel cell? That fuel goes in with either a carbon molecule or a hydrogen molecule. It reacts with air and directly produces electricity with no burning, no combustion, no money managers in between. And because it's a solid state process and it's not burning anything, it's not making noises, and it's not putting out any toxic stuff, you can put it outside your bedroom window, outside your office window where you live. So you don't require transmission distribution. So you cut out all the middle managers, all the money managers in between. You go straight from what you want. It's a direct transaction. That's the way to think about fuel cells.
I really love the analogy with in terms of thinking about things from a financial perspective on the mint side and money manager side. I got to say, it does sound a little too good to be true, right? If this was so easy, how come back in 2001 we didn't all have fuel cells? What was the challenge, and where did the innovation need to happen for Bloom to get to where it is today?
So about 130 years ago is when the first fuel cells concepts were thought about. And scientists had talked about it in various places. And the very first patents for this kind of technology especially our kind of fuel cell, which is a high temperature fuel cell, the very first patent was about 90 years ago. And about 50 different corporations, the top 100 Fortune 100 of industrials during that era, had active programs and patents in this area. And after, I would say, probably 30 to 50 billion dollars spent by private corporations, government labs, as well as government funding, nobody had even built a prototype of this particular technology, the high temperature, technology. So it probably takes a crazy person like me and crazy people like NEA and KP to bet on something long and big to say, okay, a bunch of 4 of you guys who started something in a garage can make something happen and make this technology work that others couldn't. And this, I'm talking about a particular fuel cell technology called a solid oxide fuel cell, which is a high temperature technology. And the reason this is important is the low temperature fuel cells that you're aware of that goes in cars and other things require hydrogen as a fuel. As you know, hydrogen is not a naturally available fuel. So again, it is like a battery storage and not a generator in itself. So that's not what I was interested in, number one.
Mm-hmm.
Number two, those elements have precious metal in their bill of materials. And when you have a precious metal in your bill of materials, it's anti-Moore's law. The more volume you produce, the cost of the material is going to go up. I wanted something that I knew would be very expensive to start with, but I wanted a North Star, a place where I knew if we did everything right, it'll be the cheapest, cleanest, most efficient way to produce electricity. Otherwise, I was not interested because that's the mission. So the only code to crack was the most difficult one to crack in my mind. Either go big or go bust. And so that's what we undertook. And nobody had done it before. I would say it is how we thought about it. You can say so many people before Wright brothers figured out how to fly, but if they had not persisted and done it, we would still be in horse buggies, right? So that's the way to think about it. So I knew why others failed. I did my research to figure out that I understood the root cause for why others failed, and I wouldn't fall into the same trap. There was no guarantee that I wouldn't create my own pitfalls that I couldn't overcome, but my team and I had the confidence if anybody in the world could solve it, we as a group could do it. That's the non-arrogant but self-confidence that we had to come in to say, we can do this.
And of course, I'm biased, having been an investor, but we always look for founder market fit in terms of the expertise and the team, right? We agree. If there's anyone who's going to figure out this problem, it was going to be you and your co-founders and the team you assembled. I think a key part about any technology, though, is always the first applications. And this gets a little bit back to our opening conversation in terms of how fuel cells can help contribute towards the electricity grid and making it more resilient. Where did you initially see the applications for fuel cells in kind of the early days of Bloom? And how has that grown over time? And how do you view them as a solution to some of the challenges we're seeing today?
So great question. And this is important for so many people, right? Because, most things when you're, developing something like this has the standard learning curve, like cost curve. And while our goal still is that we should be in a sub-Saharan, village, we should be in Bangladesh, and it should be affordable, we knew that's not where we could start and build a company. So the question you ask is, again, I went back to the analogs that we started the conversation with. So I said, who carried the first cell phones? It was CEOs and movie stars, one for vanity and one for because they absolutely could afford it and needed it, even if it was expensive. The value that it brought was greater. If you're going to ask how much does it cost by the minute, it's not for you. If you said, how much do I lose by not having that minute worth of conversation, it is for you, right? That's the early cell phone. And then as time goes by, today in the Kalahari Desert, Hunter is carrying one of those and going around and talking to people. So that's the curve. So we said, what is the equivalent of that? There are companies, there are enterprises for whom price of not having power is a lot more expensive than the cost of power. For example, in the very early days, we powered the PayPal data center.
Hmm.
$300+ billion of transaction happen in that data center. That is the business. If it goes down, the business goes down. And without reliable power, they couldn't do what they needed to do. So we went and powered them in a fail-safe mode. And we have an architecture that, again, it is an early NEA investment, Tandem Computers, and a founder for people who can go way back to the 80s. This is the days when the PC had just come out. And if you all remember, even in the early 90s, your PCs, the number of times you had to put your floppy drive in and reboot the whole thing to get started. That buggy is, that's how buggy it was. But here was this amazing entrepreneur CEO who said, I can cluster a whole bunch of them together. Not all of them will fail at the same time. The fault-tolerant architecture that I create will be so reliable, it'll be better than the mainframe computer that is so mature. And he was absolutely right. This is Jimmy Trabig, one of your venture partners at NEA. So when I did my research, I figured out that's a beautiful model in a world where electricity simply cannot fail. So I said, how do I take my distributed systems and make them modular and fault tolerant and hot swappable? So the concept of not having electricity was something you should only read in the history books. So that's the architecture we're creating.
And so you started with initially going after data centers, serving customers like PayPal. Over time, my understanding is you've also broadened to start to go after microgrids and even starting to see international opportunity. So besides the resiliency of data centers, where else are you seeing demand, and kind of how do you imagine fuel cells playing a role in solving future things, future Austins or future power outages in California from happening?
So great question. So if you look at where we started, about our very first units that we shipped out to, like Google, that was our first customer for a data center, was somewhere in the, if we had charged them exactly what it cost us, forget even the price and the margins, it would have been north of 20 cents a kilowatt hour. Okay, which is fairly expensive for like electricity. Since then, in the last 10 years, on average, not exactly on that line, but on average, we have reduced the cost of electricity 1 penny a year. That's been our law. We have to do everything possible to reduce electricity costs by 1 penny every single year to the customer. So today, we can offer electricity at 9 cents a kilowatt hour within 10 years. Okay. And at 9 cents, getting reliable electricity that is clean, that you control your destiny and cost predictable, and not having to depend on the utility, unpredictability, is a great value proposition. So, so we have big box stores like Home Depot, Costco, Walmart that use our systems because it's cost effective. So we are reaching out to, cities. Right after Lake Charles happened in Louisiana, the whole, like hurricane, and the entire grid structure was, like decimated there. We rapid deployed our systems, the hospital, to be able to, like provide power. Similarly, when we had to do pop-up hospitals, when COVID hit, can you imagine that in a parking lot tent is where you're gonna have your COVID patients go in, and in the absence of our fuel cell system, the only other alternative was a diesel genset that's going to put out that smoke in the same parking lot to, like power them. That's the difference, and we were able to make a difference. So we think we are ready now for at least a majority of the United States to offer not only resiliency, but resiliency at an economically viable cost point.
Yeah, I think the resiliency is, it's what's really important to me. I remember another story you shared. I think it was in Hurricane Sandy, when you had your fuel cells, which were effectively underwater, but they were still operating, right? I mean, you don't have moving parts. Yeah. To get back to what you said earlier, there's not 5 layers of energy transfer which need to happen, the simplicity actually helps drive the resiliency. And that also starts to open up the applications to many more markets.
So far, our systems have been, just happen to be because we deploy in so many places, not because, there's a black cloud on top of our, like systems. It's just because we are deployed everywhere. We have had at least 5 occasions where we were about a mile away from a earthquake epicenter.
Wow.
Of 6.7 to 7 magnitude, including in Japan, the Osaka fish market twice. We actually power the Osaka fish market. God forbid the Japanese don't have their tuna fresh, right? So we actually power that market. And what we have there is so that typhoons, hurricanes, wildfires. We had for a large biopharma and a large medical appliance producer in the Napa Valley area, the forest fires for those 2 customers came to their parking lots. We could still keep the facility running. Obviously, if the fire had come close, we would have shut it down for safety purposes. Yeah. But it came to the edge of the parking lot of their facilities. There was no power within miles of that area, but we kept that facility up and running. And what it meant to their in-process inventory, what it meant for them to come back to work after everything was done, was instantaneous compared to the weeks and months it took for the utility to bring power back on.
That's right. The instant on, instant off nature, right? I think that's one of the things I was reading about Austin, how people were trying to blame some of the renewable side of the energy, but in reality, it was actually wind, which was one of the first things to come back on, versus natural gas plants, coal. When you turn them off, it's not instant on. It's not like a computer, but the Bloom Energy server, right? Flip of a switch. If it's a PC, you're on the internet in just a few seconds. Same thing with the Bloom Energy. You're producing energy.
You're on site. You can take care of it there. Whereas for the grid, really to turn it on, the entire neighborhood should be safe. It is not only whether they can turn it on, right? It is an issue of safety. The last thing you want is to add insult to injury of turning something on when everything is not safety checked. And you got to do that over a very large swath of area, which takes time. Whereas if you have a facility like this in your facility, if you have a Bloom Energy server in your facility, then all that you got to see is if those connections are right and turn that on. And for the most part, we can do all that remotely because we remotely monitor and control everything. We don't even have to go to the place. We can just do that all through wireless communications.
So maybe we can broaden the discussion just a little bit more and talk a little bit about beyond fuel cells, which now we understand how they can contribute towards resiliency and cheaper energy. What else do you see as the challenges with the grid? I mean, what would you like to see either from regulatory perspective, from an innovation perspective, to help bring not only fuel cells to everyone, but also just making our grid more reliable, more resilient?
See, what I would say is we need a portfolio with any of these things, because when you look at electricity, right, in our modern life, it is a human need. It is no longer even bordering on luxury or a comfort issue. It is a everyday life need. It's the lifeblood of everything we do, right? When that's the case, you need to make it highly resilient. What are the basic tenets of building resiliency? Multiple sources, portfolio approach to everything, multiple ways to deliver it, no single-threaded failure along the way. These are all, if you said, I have to go to a clean sheet of paper and I have to design something, this is how you would design it, right? At the same time, let's be realistic. The grid, the central power plants are huge investments that have been made, and we're not going to strand them. And we cannot even strand them if we wanted to, because that shift to whatever you want to shift to, there's this vision of renewables plus hydrogen plus batteries will solve the problem. I'm a huge believer in that. Would I want it tomorrow? Absolutely. Would I want it yesterday? Yes, the answer is yes. But the reality is it's decades.
Mm-hmm.
It's a transition that's going to take time because of what is involved, the scale. And it's a journey and not a flip of a switch from one state to another state, right? So we need to bring all these things in. And if you want to bring multiplicity of distributed energy resources, if you need them to be dependent on different things, solar, wind, geothermal, fuel cells, hydrogen, battery storage, then any one kind of natural disaster, a cold, a heat, a flooding, is not going to take everything down. One may go down, others will stay up. And then you build then you strengthen the grid. When you do that, you need to build a tremendous amount of artificial intelligence and back and forth talk between the microgrids and the macrogrid. You need to develop that infrastructure. Tremendous opportunity for information technology, AI, autonomous control. So it's not just about any one thing. We need to build the entire ecostructure, right? And hydrogen for cars, EV charging. Can you imagine? And there are people who overnight want to shift to all electric. So I want you all to just close your eyes and visualize this for a minute, okay? The only transportation you have is all electric. Your heating, your cooling, your hot water, your cooking is all electric. Your lights are all electric, and the electricity grid fails for the next 10 days. Wouldn't you want diversity to say, I want a gas coming in through my pipe that can at least take care of some of these things so I can protect my family? The answer has to be yes. So the question is not, do you get rid of the pipe? The question is, how do you decarbonize the molecule in the pipe?
Yeah.
So it's about decarbonization. It's not, and we need multiplicity. And the dialogue we often have in this field has become very political, where it is either one extreme or the other extreme. Do nothing or flip the switch. Reality is in between. And a
Yeah,
journey to that.
I couldn't agree more in terms of needing a diversity of solutions, right? It's not going to be one size fits all. Every geography, every city, it's going to be different. And having tackling this problem is we're going to need a multitude of solutions. And something you said really struck me is it's not just a energy problem. It's actually it's an IT, a technology problem. And there's a lot of entrepreneurs in the audience who are thinking about, how can I contribute? How can I help solve this problem? I like that you painted a picture of some of the things that the industry needs, areas of innovation. Maybe going one step further, having been an entrepreneur in the climate space, having built one of the first clean tech companies, what were some of the lessons learned? Right, you had some. We like to say within NEA, Bloom has 9 lives. Right, the amount of times that you were able to make a breakthrough or figure out the next step, and it's just amazing. I would love to hear advice and lessons learned to share with some of the energy entrepreneurs who are now looking at this new wave and are going to go start the Bloom energies of the future.
Aaron's being very kind. It's how many times did you have near-death experiences and still come out is the simple way to say it. And too many to count is what I would say. Too many to count is what I would say. But look, this is where it, I'm sure those of you in the audience feel this way about your own things. I didn't go to sleep one night worried that I'm not going to come out of this. I had the confidence that we'll go fix it. And thank God, it turned out that way. So we can be here talking about it today and laughing about it today, as opposed to saying why something different happened. Energy is a tough field to start with. Number one, we talked about the politics of it. Number two is it's a regulated business. Mm-hmm. It's a highly regulated business. And like in most situations, policy is the last to catch up. Regulation is the last to catch up. Technology moves a lot faster. It's getting better, but especially for us as an early entrant into this field, it was hellish. And even today, no single set of rules exists. The rules of the road don't exist. And it would be one thing if the rules of the road didn't exist and it was a free-for-all Wild West. We as entrepreneurs probably would love that, right? But the truth is, the rules of the road doesn't exist for you to operate, but the rules of the road exist to stop you from doing anything you want to do.
Hmm.
So you get the worst of both sides because the regulations were written for a monopoly era.
Yeah,
Utilities in pretty
it's
much
not
every
like
area. Yeah.
it's not like Facebook. You can't move fast and break things because you're breaking the energy grid, and
Yes.
that quickly turns regulators and creates a lot of unhappy citizens.
Exactly. So that's something to keep in mind and make sure how are you going to navigate it. I would say I severely underestimated that dimension as I thought through, and it's a learning. The other thing that I would also say is for us building something brand new, building that entire supply chain from scratch, because this is like the early days of the chip building. You didn't have the applied materials that would build your tools. You didn't have the synopsis that would give you your design tools. So you didn't have the ecosystem around you where everybody did something. And if you design something, you had all the other things to actually fabricate it. We had to actually design and build our own machines. We had to actually design the controls for it. Even how we operate our fuel cells remotely, we had to design the software for it. So it's kind of if you want to think about it, a Intel, a Dell, and a Microsoft
Yeah,
had to be all built together along with an applied materials that built the machines. That's what we had to do and create a brand new supply chain for it. So those were some of the difficulties that we had to overcome. And they were challenging, but it's very rewarding. And when you come to the other side of it, you have an unbelievable competitive advantage.
yeah, totally. Totally. Yeah. I mean, having the ability to vertically integrate and control your costs
Mm-hmm.
and how wide a moat that creates. Now you'd be able to build that into effectively becoming a leading fuel cell company with, no competitors in sight. I think the entrepreneurial side of it is really interesting because on one hand, it's pretty easy to see climate and energy as an overwhelming problem. And you might see it as, where do I get started? And how can I actually build something huge? But what struck me about Bloom is, even from the early days, you had this vision and you knew it would be complicated, but you figured it out, right? In terms of new challenges, the supply chain, figuring that all out, you were able to deliver and build a really large successful company. And that leads me to entrepreneurs in the audience right now probably thinking about other ideas they have. Like what does the industry need? I mean, what's your advice to where entrepreneurs should be spending their time? Where are you excited about when you think, if not in Bloom, where else would you be innovating on in the energy supply chain, and or where else would you be focused on helping to solve the energy and climate crisis?
So great question. Look, the few things that have not been solved yet, right? And there's a lot of people working on it, but there is no clear pathway or clear way for energy storage at very large scale. Okay, so to give you an idea of the challenge I'm talking about, if all the grid scale battery storage in the country deployed so far had been concentrated in Texas and powered the Texas power crisis after it happened and kept the lights on, for at the level of demand that Texas had, you would have had 6 more minutes of electricity. Okay.
Peanuts.
Yeah. And very expensive electricity, a lot more expensive than even what some people are getting charged right now for. And even that would have lasted only that long. So there's a scale innovation problem that needs to happen in storage. The second area is very exciting. It is the shift from so far since marketed energy to today, there have been two very distinct silos: stationary energy and transportation energy. That silo is getting broken for the first time. you will produce hydrogen from renewable electricity and put that into a car and drive your car. You will take electricity and charge it to a EV and drive your car. That EV battery, when the lights are not on, maybe charging your home. So that whole intersection, fleets of vehicles, how that happens is brand new. It's just opening up. There's room for many more Tesla-like ideas.
Totally.
Right?
Totally
Many
agree.
more of those in distinct ways that we are not thinking about. So I would say, so here's how I would, rather than say, what are the fields? There are two things that motivate people, right? The higher purpose, the scale of a problem, how it makes life better, and definitely in a capitalistic world, the greed of how big that picture is. So if you asked me, I would say the $5+ trillion energy market today is the equivalent of what the computer market was when it was only DEC and IBM mainframe computers.
So we're at
Add a zero to that, and that's what
version
energy market
1.0, right?
Right,
We're in
version 1.0.
phase. And I think
Exactly.
that's a really great place to end the conversation, KR, in terms of, we're at the stage one, and there's a huge, massive market opportunity out there. And love the sense of optimism. And thanks so much for spending time with me, and really enjoyed getting to know you and the Bloom Energy story better.
Thank you so much, Aaron. Appreciate it. And good luck to those entrepreneurs listening to us.